The Malcor Empire had conquered over 100 worlds, each falling with barely a whimper. Their war machine was a thing of legend, a seamless blend of biological augmentation and advanced AI strategy. When their supreme warlord Zyrith gazed upon the blue-green marble of Earth, he did not see an obstacle. He saw an inevitable conquest. The invasion force descended in textbook fashion. Their warships, colossal vessels of sleek black metal and pulsating energy cores, tore through Earth's atmosphere, blotting out the sun over the targeted city. Armored dropships rumbled as they deployed elite warriors, towering figures encased in biomechanical exosuits, their segmented plating shifting like liquid steel. Their orders were simple: subjugate the sector, establish dominance, prepare for full-scale planetary integration. High Commander Vortash, a veteran of 24 planetary annexations, stepped onto the ruined pavement. His multi-lensed helmet adjusted to Earth's atmosphere, scanning for the planet's defensive measures. He expected resistance, tanks, aerial bombardments, infantry with crude kinetic weapons. Yet the streets were eerily silent. No soldiers, no sirens. Just the quiet hum of flickering streetlights and the occasional honk of an abandoned car still rolling forward on autopilot. He gestured to his second-in-command. Have the humans already surrendered? Before the officer could respond, something clattered nearby, a rhythmic metallic knocking. They turned in unison, their glowing visors locking onto the only sign of movement in the desolate street. A woman stood in front of a rundown repair shop, banging a wrench against a rusted generator. She wore oil-streaked overalls, sleeves rolled up over grease-smudged arms, her red hair pulled into a messy bun. She muttered curses under her breath as she smacked the machine again, oblivious to the squadron of alien warriors assembling before her. Vortash straightened to his full height, armor servos hissing. Human, you stand before the might of the Malcor Empire. The woman glanced up, squinting at the mass of alien soldiers. She sighed. You gotta be kidding me. There was a long pause. Vortash, who had heard defiance in many forms, was momentarily thrown by the sheer lack of awe in her tone. You do not seem surprised. She leaned against the generator, wiping her hands on a rag. Listen, buddy, I don't have time for whatever sci-fi role-play you got going on. I've been trying to fix this power grid all damn day, and now I got armored space goons blocking my shop. Vortash's subordinates shifted uncomfortably, their training ill-equipped for this response. The commander recalibrated, raising his voice for dramatic effect. You misunderstand. We are not customers, I figured, she cut in, tossing her wrench onto her workbench. So unless you're here to pay for repairs, how about you take your alien invasion and shove it up? Vortash snapped his clawed gauntlet forward, signaling the warriors to advance. You will kneel before the Malcor. Now. Chuck McAllister tilted her head, folding her arms. Her eyes trailed over the 7-foot-tall warriors in their imposing armor, then down to the ground. She pursed her lips and kicked an empty soda can toward them. It bounced pathetically against the commander's armored boot. A beat of silence. Then one of the warriors reached out to grab her. Big mistake. With a practiced flick, Chuck sidestepped and drove her elbow into the warrior's gut. The armor absorbed the blow, but the sheer unexpectedness of it sent the alien stumbling back. Before he could react, she snatched her wrench off the bench and swung upward in a brutal arc. The impact cracked against his helmet with a resounding clang, sending him sprawling. The other soldiers hesitated. Chuck exhaled. Right. So that's how today's gonna go. Vortash's mind raced to adjust. No human civilian should have been able to react that quickly. But then again, no human civilian should have had the audacity to strike one of the Empire's elite warriors with a wrench. Another soldier lunged. Chuck ducked under his swing, twisting to the side and driving her steel-toed boot into the back of his knee. He collapsed forward, and before he could recover, she brought the wrench down on his exposed helmet joint with mechanical precision. Vortash's visor flickered with damage readouts from his warriors. He clenched his mandibles. Enough. 2 Malcor mechs stomped forward, towering over Chuck. Plasma cannons locked onto her, humming with lethal energy. She squinted up at them, then sighed. This day just keeps getting better. The first mech fired. Chuck threw herself sideways as the blast incinerated the sidewalk where she'd been standing. She rolled, grabbing a length of steel pipe from a workbench, and flung it at the second mech's exposed joint. It was a desperate improvised move, but it worked. The pipe wedged into the armor's mechanical knee, causing a short circuit. The machine stumbled. She didn't hesitate. Sprinting forward, she leaped onto the mech's chassis and climbed like she was scaling a piece of construction equipment. The pilot inside barely had time to register what was happening before she reached the cockpit hatch. Chuck yanked a multi-tool from her belt, jammed it into a maintenance panel, and twisted. Sparks flew. The mech shuddered. Inside, the alien pilot let out a panicked screech as his controls went dark. The mech collapsed backward, slamming into the pavement with a deafening crash. Chuck rolled off just in time, breathing hard. Vortash took a step back. This was wrong. This was impossible. This human, this mechanic, was fighting his warriors like they were nothing. He opened his comms to the fleet, requesting reinforcement. Immediately, a crackling response came through. Understood. Additional units inbound. Chuck dusted herself off, glancing up at the sky as more dropships loomed overhead. She exhaled. Oh, for foo. A thunderous explosion cut her off as another wave of Malcor landed in formation. This time, they deployed battle droids, sleek, multi-limbed automatons with plasma blades humming to life. One of them scanned her. Threat level, insignificant. Chuck scoffed. Oh, you're definitely getting scrapped first. She lunged before the droids could react, swinging her wrench into one's optical sensor. Sparks erupted. The droid spasmed before she grabbed it and hurled it into its partner. The remaining warriors hesitated, eyes darting between the wreckage of their machines and the humans standing amid it, gripping a wrench like it was Excalibur. Above them, aboard the command ship, Supreme Warlord Xyrith observed the battle feed. His mandibles clicked in disbelief. A lone human, a civilian, had single-handedly delayed an entire invasion force. He turned to his war council. Who is she? One of the advisors hurriedly checked intercepted transmissions. Her name is Charlie McAllister. She is a mechanic. Xyrith stared at the screen. A mechanic did this? The advisor hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Supreme Warlord. Xyrith's fingers tapped against the hilt of his ceremonial blade. Then Earth is more dangerous than we anticipated. On the battlefield, Vortash activated his energy blade, its violet glow illuminating his armor. He had no choice. He would handle this himself. Chuck rolled her shoulders as he stepped forward. Oh, she muttered. So now we're taking this personally. She tightened her grip on her wrench. Bring it on, Tin Man. The battlefield smoldered in the dying light of the afternoon. Shattered metal and broken bodies littered the streets. Blackened scorch marks seared into the pavement where plasma fire had carved deep craters. The Malcor war machine had never been forced to halt its advance before, let alone by a single unarmed human. It defied all logic, all strategic projections. And yet, here they were. Charlie McAllister stood amid the wreckage, rolling her shoulder with a wince. The adrenaline was wearing off, and her body was beginning to protest the abuse she had put it through. A bruise was already forming where she had been clipped by a shock baton, and her knuckles were raw from where they had connected with alien armor. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. More were coming. Across the street, High Commander Vortash stared at her, his visor dimly reflecting the flames still crackling from the ruined remains of their war mechs. His grip tightened around the hilt of his energy blade, a weapon honed for 1,000 victories, each strike lethal, each movement perfected over years of combat. It hummed menacingly, pulsing with violet energy, a stark contrast to the dull, battered wrench resting against Charlie's shoulder. She exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of her neck. Listen, big guy, I don't know how many more of you I gotta clobber before you get the hint, but I got about 5 busted generators waiting on me back at the shop. So maybe, just maybe, you could take the loss and call it a day. Vortash said nothing. His warriors had fallen. His droids were malfunctioning. The war mechs, invulnerable against planetary defenses, were now heaps of scrap. It was unthinkable. He had conquered worlds, raised civilizations, broken empires. And here he was, locked in a standoff with a human who smelled of engine grease and radiator fluid. A soldier stepped forward, plasma rifle raised, but Vortash lifted a clawed hand to stop him. This was beyond protocol now. The battle had become something else. A test, an anomaly, a problem that needed solving with his own hands. Charlie smirked. Oh, so now it's personal. She shifted her stance as he advanced, watching the way he moved. Heavy, deliberate. His armor was fast, but not fast enough. The energy blade crackled as he lunged, and she barely had time to twist out of the way, feeling the heat of the weapon slice the air an inch from her side. He came at her again, forcing her to weave, dodging each calculated strike. She didn't have the reach, didn't have the armor, but what she did have was experience working in tight spaces, contorting her body around jagged metal and live wires in ways that defied sense. She ducked low, slid between his legs, and brought her wrench up hard against the exposed joint of his knee. The impact was like striking steel, but something gave. Vortash staggered. Charlie grinned. Huh, didn't like that, did ya? He responded with a backhanded strike that caught her square in the ribs and sent her skidding across the pavement. Stars burst in her vision, and for a moment, she thought she might pass out. She coughed, tasting copper, and forced herself upright, shaking off the daze. Vortash did not gloat. He did not sneer. He simply reset his stance. She spat blood onto the ground and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. All right, no more playing nice. She pivoted on her heel and sprinted towards the wreckage of a downed Malcor war mech. The remaining soldiers tensed, unsure of what she was doing, but Vortash was already moving, chasing her down with inhuman speed. Charlie leapt onto the smoldering husk, scrambling up its twisted frame with practiced ease. She knew machines. She knew their weak points, their inner workings. And right now, she knew one thing for sure. This one still had power. She yanked open a maintenance hatch, fingers moving with mechanical precision as she rerouted a circuit with a quick flick of her multitool. The dead war mech whirred weakly to life beneath her. Vortash leapt. She rolled sideways as he landed where she had just been, his blade slicing clean through the metal. With one final spark of rewired energy, the mech's auxiliary weapon powered up, a shoulder-mounted plasma cannon now wired directly into her control. Charlie didn't even hesitate. She slammed her fist down on the activation panel. The cannon fired point-blank into the battlefield, sending a shockwave that knocked soldiers off their feet and obliterated a chunk of the road. Vortash barely managed to disengage, flipping backwards as the impact seared the space he had occupied a second earlier. Charlie slid down the mech's ruined frame, panting, her limbs shaking from exertion. She was running on fumes now. Vortash's armor was singed, his breathing heavier. He had underestimated her. He wouldn't do so again. His soldiers watched, awaiting his command. He didn't give one. Charlie saw it in his posture, in the subtle shift of weight. He was assessing, recalculating. The Malcor were not foolish. They were a war machine built on strategic adaptation. And now he understood. This was not a fight he could win through force alone. Charlie squared her shoulders, still gripping her wrench like a lifeline. She was done with this. She was tired, sore, hungry, and she had an early shift tomorrow. Let me guess, she called out, voice hoarse. You're about to do the tactical retreat thing, right? Vortash didn't respond immediately. He turned, slow and deliberate, scanning the battlefield strewn with the wreckage of what was supposed to be a routine planetary conquest. Then he spoke, voice measured. We were wrong about your kind. Charlie let out a short, exhausted laugh. Yeah, no kidding. The High Commander lifted his hand, signaling to his troops. The remaining Malcor soldiers, battered and bruised, hesitated only a moment before retreating to their dropships. Charlie watched as the war machines powered down, the mechs left in ruins, the battle fading into silence. The warlord lingered a moment longer, his unreadable gaze fixed on her. "You are not a soldier," he said. She rolled her shoulder with a wince. "You're real observant." He tilted his head slightly. "And yet you fought." She sighed, shaking her head. "Yeah, well, somebody had to." Vortash studied her for a long moment before he spoke again. "I do not believe this is the last time we will meet." Charlie exhaled. "Oh, good. Something to look forward to." With that, he turned and stepped onto his dropship. The engines flared to life, and just like that, the Malcor were gone. Charlie stood there for a moment, staring at the empty sky, her wrench hanging loosely in her grip. Then she groaned, rubbing her temples. Her shop was wrecked. Her tools were scattered. She was pretty sure she had a fractured rib. She glanced down at the battered hunk of metal that used to be a war mech, then nudged it with her boot. "Wonder how much I can scrap you for." The Malcor fleet loomed in Earth's orbit, an unbroken line of black metal and pulsating energy cores stretching across the stars. Warships the size of cities cast eerie shadows over the planet's surface, their cannons primed, their commanders awaiting orders. This was no longer a battle. This was retribution. Supreme Warlord Xyrath stood at the helm of his flagship, his clawed fingers drumming against the metal railing as he watched the reports flicker across the holographic display. High Commander Vortash had failed. The Malcor's greatest warriors had been humiliated. The war mechs had fallen. And all of it, every single catastrophic failure, could be traced back to one human, a mechanic. It was unacceptable. Xyrath's mandibles clicked as he turned to his war council. "Deploy the full fleet." A murmur of unease passed through the assembled commanders. One of them hesitated before stepping forward. "Supreme Warlord, our initial scans indicated this planet's defenses were primitive. Are we certain such force is necessary?" Xyrath's gaze snapped to the officer, his golden eyes burning with barely restrained fury. "Did our initial scans predict that one human would dismantle our invasion force with a wrench?" The officer fell silent. Xyrath turned back toward the holographic projection of Earth. "We will not suffer further embarrassment. If conventional tactics fail, we shall burn this planet to its core." A fleet-wide transmission was sent. Earth had 5 hours to surrender. No response came. Charlie McAllister didn't even hear the transmission. She was too busy trying to pry open the control panel of a wrecked Malcor mech with a crowbar. The remnants of the battlefield were still smoldering. Her shop, barely standing, had taken heavy damage from the firefight. Its roof caved in, its walls blackened from stray plasma blasts. Her tools were scattered across the pavement, and a deep gouge had been carved into the lot where an explosion had nearly wiped her out. She let out a frustrated grunt as the rusted bolts refused to budge. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk." With one final yank, the panel popped open, sending her stumbling backward. Wires spilled out in a tangled mess, still sparking weakly. She wiped her forehead, smearing grease across her temple. "All right, let's see what you're made of." She reached inside, carefully rewiring a power relay, fingers moving with practiced ease. The Malcor tech was advanced, sure, but at the end of the day, everything ran on circuits, pressure valves, and good old-fashioned problem-solving. The mech groaned weakly as its systems flickered to life. Charlie grinned. "That's what I'm talking about." A sharp beep echoed from the broken cockpit, and she frowned, leaning in to inspect the source. A red warning flashed across the alien interface, unreadable symbols scrolling too fast for her to process. Her stomach sank. This wasn't just a mech. It was transmitting data. Her gaze snapped upward just in time to see the sky split. The first warship descended like a god falling from the heavens, its hull gleaming with an ominous, otherworldly glow. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the horizon was choked with the overwhelming presence of the Malcor fleet. Charlie let out a slow breath. Well, that's not great. The streets trembled as landing craft began their descent. Rows of war mechs, twice the size of the previous models, lined the avenue. Drones swarmed the air, scanning, hunting. A deep mechanical voice boomed from the nearest ship, shaking the very foundation of the city. "Human, You have been identified. Surrender immediately. Charlie rubbed the bridge of her nose. Oh, for the love of... Why do you guys keep acting like I planned this? A war mech took a step forward, its weapons whirring as it locked onto her. Failure to comply will result in complete eradication. She sighed. Right. Okay. With one swift motion, she grabbed the nearest alien power cell, yanked it free from the wreckage, and hurled it straight at the mech's chest. The impact sent out a wild surge of energy, frying its targeting system instantly. The mech staggered, circuits popping, before collapsing in a heap of smoking metal. For a long, stunned moment, the battlefield was silent. Then every remaining Malcor unit turned their weapons on her. Charlie bolted. She vaulted over debris, narrowly dodging a plasma bolt that melted a chunk of pavement where she had just been standing. A drone swooped low, scanning her movements, and she whirled mid-stride, grabbing a loose wrench from the ground and hurling it. The wrench clanged against the drone's propulsion unit. It wobbled, sparked violently, then spiraled straight into the side of a war mech, detonating on impact. Charlie didn't stop running. She dove through the shattered window of an abandoned warehouse, rolling to her feet as more plasma fire rained down behind her. The moment she hit cover, she yanked out her multi-tool and began rewiring a salvaged alien transmitter. If they were going to kill her, she was at least going to make it annoying. The Malcor stormed inside. Heavy boots pounded against the floor, shadows moving between the beams of shattered sunlight, cutting through the warehouse walls. One of the war mechs activated its thermal scanners, searching. There was a flicker of movement. Then static flooded their comms. Every war mech in the sector shut down simultaneously. Charlie peered over the edge of the control panel, grinning. Guess your security system wasn't built for human-level nonsense. The soldiers turned, searching for her, but she was already gone. She sprinted toward the nearest service tunnel, disappearing into the underground maze of maintenance corridors and sewer lines. She had spent years working in places like this, knew every twist, every broken-down vent, every shortcut. The moment she surfaced again, she had already made a plan. She wasn't going to win this with brute force. That was their game. She was going to fight like a mechanic. By the time the Malcor had rebooted their forces, the battlefield had changed. Streetlights flickered with unstable energy. Manhole covers had been wired to explode. Power surges rattled through their defense grids, causing war mechs to misfire and drones to veer off course. Everywhere they turned, something was breaking. And, at the center of it all, was one woman with a toolbox. Charlie crouched atop a ruined billboard, watching as the Malcor desperately tried to regain control. She tapped a button on the jury-rigged remote in her hand, and another war mech collapsed, its systems overloading from a redirected power surge. She took a swig from a can of soda she had stolen from a vending machine. You guys really should have sent an engineer instead of a warlord. In the orbiting flagship, Supreme Warlord Xyrath watched in horror as the battle reports rolled in. Every attack formation was failing. Every system was malfunctioning. One human had turned an entire invasion force into scrap metal. His fists clenched. Enough. Fire the main cannon. His officers hesitated. But, Supreme Warlord, I said fire. The warship's primary weapon ignited, its energy core pulsing with enough power to vaporize the city in a single blast. Charlie, still perched on the billboard, watched as the sky began to glow. She exhaled. All right, time to go. She jumped down, sprinting toward the nearest Malcor command node. If she could just get into their mainframe, maybe she could. A piercing siren cut through the air. Then, without warning, every Malcor warship shut down. The fleet flickered. Lights dimmed. Engines sputtered. Charlie skidded to a stop, heart pounding. Wait, what? Above her, the warships began retreating. On the command deck, Warlord Xyrath's furious demands were overridden. A new transmission cut through the fleet. This conflict has drawn too much attention. The Council has ruled. Retreat immediately. Xyrath's eyes burned with fury. This is MY war. Not anymore. The transmission cut out. Charlie, still gripping her wrench, watched as the Malcor forces vanished into the void. She exhaled, bending over, hands on her knees. Well, that was dramatic. She wiped her forehead, taking one last sip of her soda. Then, just like that, she turned and walked back toward the remains of her shop. She had generators to fix. The silence after a battle was always the strangest part. Charlie McAllister sat on the hood of an overturned transport vehicle, her wrench resting across her lap, watching as the last wisps of smoke curled into the morning sky. The Malcor were gone. Their fleet had pulled back so fast it was like the whole invasion had been some sort of cosmic clerical error. The alien warriors, who had once marched through these streets, confident in their overwhelming superiority, had left behind only their wreckage, their broken war machines scattered like discarded toys. She exhaled, leaning back against the war metal, letting exhaustion settle into her bones. Her body ached in places she didn't even know could ache. There was a nasty bruise across her ribs, her overalls were scorched, and her knuckles were still scraped raw. But she was alive. Against every reasonable prediction, against every tactical projection the Malcor had likely run in their fancy war computers, she had survived. Not just survived. She had won. Footsteps crunched over the rubble, and she barely lifted her head as a group of soldiers approached. Earth's soldiers this time. Late as usual. A general grizzled, built like he'd been carved from a mountain, metals gleaming against his uniform, stared down at her. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "You," he started. Charlie raised an eyebrow. "Me." He looked at the wreckage around them, at the melted craters where Metz had once stood, at the smoldering wreck of a dropship that had been turned into a scrap heap, at the body of a war droid that still had a wrench embedded in its central processing unit. Then he looked back at her. "You did this." His voice was somewhere between disbelief and admiration. She wiped a streak of grease from her cheek. "Yeah, I guess I did." Silence stretched between them, and then one of the younger soldiers muttered, "Holy shit." Charlie let out a breath and finally pushed herself up, rolling her stiff shoulder. "Look, I appreciate you guys finally showing up, but if you came expecting to fight, you're a little late to the party." The general shook his head, his stern expression cracking into something closer to awe. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She stretched, wincing. "Besides saving my own ass?" "No, not really." One of the soldiers stepped forward, his tablet screen flickering with incoming transmissions. "Ma'am, whatever you did, it's everywhere. The entire Galactic network is broadcasting the footage. Some kind of universal relay picked up the Malcor's battle feeds before they retreated. You're all over the alien channels." Charlie groaned, rubbing her temples. "Fantastic. Exactly what I wanted." "You don't understand," the soldier continued, looking at her like she had just rewritten the laws of physics. "You didn't just fight them. You humiliated them. The Malcor Empire, the ones who steamrolled the CRYSH Dominion, who wiped out the Vornax warclans in a week, ran from a single human woman with a wrench. The galaxy isn't seeing Earth as some backwater planet anymore." He swallowed. "They're seeing us as a threat." Charlie stared at him. Then she started laughing. Not because it was funny, oh no, it was terrible, but because the sheer absurdity of it all was too much. She had spent her life fixing broken machines, yelling at malfunctioning circuit boards, and now she was some kind of intergalactic terror? She shook her head, still chuckling. "Great. So now we've got a bunch of spaced bureaucrats watching us like we're the next big problem." The general sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Not just watching, negotiating. The Galactic Federation got involved the second the Malcor pulled back. Apparently, they've been trying to keep those warmongering bastards in check for centuries. And now, because of you, the Federation is demanding peace talks. Charlie blinked. "Wait. Hold on. You're telling me the people who just tried to incinerate my neighborhood are now sitting at a space conference table talking about peace?" "They're scared of us," the general admitted. "Of you. The Malcor don't retreat. They don't lose. And when they do, they come back with overwhelming force. But this time they didn't." Charlie frowned. "Why?" The general looked at her, measuring his words. "Because they don't understand what just happened. They threw everything at you super soldiers, Metz, an entire fleet. and you tore them apart with a wrench and some improvised engineering. You fought them like they've never been fought before. And now, they think you're either a strategic genius or some kind of mythical war god. Charlie groaned, rubbing her face. Great. Just what I need. A Galactic fan club. The general almost smiled. It gets worse. She dropped her hands. Of course it does. The Galactic Federation wants you at the peace talks. She stared at him, deadpan. No. They want to meet the champion of Earth, he pressed. They think you're the one who dictates our war strategy. She threw her hands in the air. I fix generators. They don't know that. She turned away, pacing, muttering to herself. This is insane. I was supposed to finish a tune-up today. I had an appointment. A normal one. Not a... She gestured wildly at the wreckage. Galactic incident. The general crossed his arms. I hate to say it, McAllister, but normal might not be an option for you anymore. She paused, exhaling. Her shop was in ruins. Her quiet life of fixing things, of complaining about broken compressors and faulty wiring, was over. No matter what she did next, the universe had already made up its mind about her. She looked back at the general. So what? I just smile and wave at some alien diplomats and hope they don't declare war out of spite. His expression softened. You go there, you be yourself, and you remind them why picking a fight with Earth is a bad idea. She snorted. Because we hit things with tools until they work. He gave her a wry look. Because we don't back down, even when the odds are impossible. She hesitated, then sighed, resting a hand on her hip. Fine. I'll go. She pointed at him. But I'm not wearing a damn suit. A low hum filled the air as a Federation transport ship descended, sleek and diplomatic. A stark contrast to the war machines that had darkened the sky only hours before. Charlie squinted up at it, shaking her head. Hope they stocked the minibar. As she stepped aboard, leaving behind the wreckage, the war, and her quiet life, she had no idea what awaited her in the stars. But she had a feeling it was going to be one hell of a headache.